Section 2, Book of Ghosts. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kirk Ziegler. The Book of Ghosts by Sabine Baring Gould. Section 2, Pomps and Vanities, Part 1. Colonel Mountjoy had an appointment in India that kept him there permanently. Consequently, he was constrained to send his two daughters to England when they were quite children. His wife had died of cholera at Madras. The girls were Letice and Betty. There was a year's difference in their ages, but they were extraordinarily alike, so much so that they might have been supposed to be twins. Letice was given up to the charge of Miss Mountjoy, her father's sister, and Betty to that of Lady Lacy, her maternal aunt. Their father would have preferred that his daughters should have been together, but there were difficulties in the way. Neither of the ladies was inclined to be burdened with both, and if both had been placed with one, the other might have regarded and resented this as a slight. As the children grew up, their likeness in feature became more close, but they diverged exceedingly in expression. A sullenness, an unhappy look, a towering fire of resentment characterized that of Letice, whereas the face of Betty was open and gay. This difference was due to the difference in their bringing up. Lady Lacy, who had a small house in North Devon, was a kindly, intellectual, and broad-minded old lady, of sweet disposition, but a decided will. She saw a good deal of society, and did her best to train Betty to be an educated and liberal-minded woman of culture and graceful manners. She did not send her to school, but had her taught at home, and on the excuse that her eyes were weak by artificial light, she made the girl read to her in the evenings, and always read books that were standard and calculated to increase her knowledge and to develop her understanding. Lady Lacy detested all shams, and under her influence Betty grew up to be thoroughly straightforward, healthy-minded, and true. On the other hand, Miss Mountjoy was, as Letice called her, a killjoy. She had herself been reared in the midst of the Clapham sect, had become rigid in all of her ideas, narrow in all her sympathies, and a bundle of prejudices. The present generation of young people know nothing of the system of repression that was exercised in that of their fathers and mothers. Now the tendency is wholly in the other direction, and too greatly so. It is possibly due to the revulsion of feeling against a training that is looked upon with a shudder. To that narrow school there existed but two categories of men and women, the Christians and the worldlings, and those who pertained to it arrogated themselves to the former title. The judgment had already begun with the severance of the sheep from the goats, and the saints who judged the world had their Jerusalem at Clapham. In that school, the works of the great masters of English literature, Shakespeare, Pope, Scott, Byron, were taboo. No work of imagination was tolerated save the Apocalypse, and that was degraded into a polemic by such scribblers as Eliot and Cumming. No entertainments, not even the oratorios of Handel, were tolerated. They savoured of the world. The nearest approach to excitement was found in a missionary meeting. The Chinese contract the feet of their daughters, but those English Claphamites cramped the minds of their children. The Venetians made use of an iron prison, with gradually contracting walls, and finally crushed the life out of the captive. But these elect Christians put their sons and daughters into a school that squeezed their energies and their intelligences to death. Dickens caricatured such people in Miss Jellyby and Mr. Chadband, but he sketched them only in their external aspect, and left untouched their private action in distorting young minds, maiming their wills, damping down all youthful buoyancy. But the result did not answer the expectation of those who adopted this system with the young. Some daughters, indeed, of weaker wills, were permanently stunted and shaped on the approved model, but nearly all the sons, and most of the daughters, on obtaining their freedom, broke away to utter frivolity and dissipation, or if they retained any religious impressions, galloped through the Church of England, performing strange antics on the way, and plunged into the arms of Rome. Such was the system to which the high-spirited, strong-willed Letice was subjected, and from which was no escape. The consequence was that Letice tossed and bit at her chains, and that there ensued frequent outbreaks of resentment against her aunt. "Oh, Aunt Hannah, I want something to read." After some demur and disdainful rejection of more serious works, she was allowed Milton. Then she said, "Oh, I do love Comus. Comus," gasped Miss Mountjoy. "And l'Allegro and Il Penseroso, they're not bad." "My child, these were the compositions of the immortal bard before his eyes were opened. I thought, aunt, that he had dictated the Paradise Lost and Regained after he was blind." "I refer to the eyes of his soul," said the old lady sternly. "I want a story book. There is The Dairyman's Daughter. I have read it, and hate it." "I fear, Leticia, that you are in the gall and bitterness and the bond of iniquity." Unhappily, the sisters very rarely met one another, but it was occasionally that Lady Lacy and Betty came to town, and when they did, Miss Mountjoy put as many difficulties as she could in the way of their associating together. On one such visit to London, Lady Lacy called and asked if she might take Letice with herself to the theatre. Miss Mountjoy shivered with horror, reared herself, and expressed her opinion of stage plays, and those who went to see them in strong and uncomplimentary terms. As she had custody of Letice, she would by no persuasion be induced to allow her to imperil her soul by going to such a wicked place. Lady Lacy was fain to withdraw in some dismay and much regret. Poor Letice, who had heard this offer made, had flashed into a sudden brightness and a tremor of joy. When it was refused, she burst into a flood of tears and an ecstasy of rage. She ran up to her room, took and tore pieces of a volume of Clayton's sermons, scattered the leaves over the floor, and stamped on them. "Letice," said Miss Mountjoy, when she saw the devastation, "you are a child of wrath. Why mayn't I go where there is something pretty to see? Why may I not hear good music? Why must I be kept for ever in the doleful dumps? Because these are the things of the world, worldly? If God hates all that is fair and beautiful, why did He create the peacock, the hummingbird, the bird of paradise, instead of filling the world with barn door fowls? You have a carnal mind. You will never go to heaven." "Lucky I, if the saints there do nothing but hold missionary meetings to convert one another. Pray, what else can they do?" "They are engaged in the worship of God." "I don't know what that means. All I am acquainted with is the worship of the congregation. At Salem Chapel the minister faces it, mouths at it, gesticulates to it, harangues, flatters, fawns at it, and indeed prays at it. If that be all, heaven must be a deadly dull hole." Miss Mountjoy reared herself, and she became livid with wrath. "You wicked girl!" "Aunt," said Letice, intent on further incensing her, "I do wish you would let me go, just for once, to a Catholic church to see what the worship of God is." "I would rather see you dead at my feet," exclaimed the incensed lady, and stalked, rigid as a poker, out of the room. Thus the unhappy girl grew up to a woman's estate, her heart seething with rebellion. And then a terrible thing occurred. She caught scarlet fever, which took an unfavourable turn, and her life was despaired of. Miss Mountjoy was not one to conceal from the girl that her days were few, and her future condition hopeless. Letice fought against the idea of dying so young. "Oh, aunt, I won't die. I can't die. I have seen nothing of the Pomps and Vanities. I want to just taste them and know what they are like. Oh, save me. Make the doctor give me something to revive me. I want the Pomps and Vanities, oh so much. I will not. I cannot die." But her will, her struggle, availed nothing, and she passed away into the great unseen. Miss Mountjoy wrote a formal letter to her brother, who had now become a general, to inform him of the lamented decease of his eldest daughter. It was not a comforting letter. It dwelt unnecessarily on the faults of Letice. It expressed no hopes as to her happiness in the world to which she had passed. There had been no signs of resignation at the last, no turning from the world with its pomps and vanities to better things, only a vain longing after what she could not have, a bitter resentment against Providence for having denied them to her, and a steeling of her heart against good and pious influences. A year had passed. Lady Lacy had come to town along with her niece. A dear friend had placed her house at her disposal. She had herself gone to Dresden with her daughters to finish them off in music and German. Lady Lacy was very glad of the occasion, for Betty was now of age to be brought out. There was to be a great ball at the house of the Countess of Belgrove, unto whom Lady Lacy was related, and at the ball Betty was to make her debut. The girl was in a condition of boundless excitement. A beautiful ball dress of white satin, trimmed with rich Valenciennes lace, was laid over her chair for her to wear. Neat little white satin shoes stood on the floor, quite new, for her feet. In a flower glass stood a red camellia that was destined to adorn her hair, and on the dressing table, in a morocco case, was a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. The maid did her hair, but the camellia, which was to be the only point of colour about her, except her rosy lips and flushed cheeks, that camellia was not to be put into her hair until the last minute. The maid offered to help her dress. "No, thank you, Martha. I can do that perfectly well by myself. I am accustomed to use my own hands, and I take my own time about it. But really, miss, I think you should allow me." Indeed, no. There is plenty of time, and I shall go leisurely to work. When the carriage just comes, tap on the door and tell me, and I will rejoin my aunt." When the maid was gone, Betty locked the door. She lighted the candles beside the cheval glass, and looked at herself in the mirror and laughed. For the first time, with glad surprise and innocent pleasure, she realized how pretty she was. And pretty she was indeed, with her pleasant face, honest eyes, finely arched eyebrows, and twinkling smile that produced dimples on her cheeks. "There's plenty of time," she said. "I shan't take 100 years in dressing now that my hair is done." She yawned. A great heaviness had come over her. "I really think I shall have a nap first. I am dead sleepy now, and 40 winks will set me up for the night." Then she laid herself upon the bed. A numbing, overpowering lethargy weighed on her, and almost at once she sank into a dreamless sleep. So unconscious was she that she did not hear Martha's tap at the door, nor the roll of the carriage as it took her aunt away. She woke with a start. It was full day. For some moments she did not realize this fact, nor that she was still dressed in the gown in which she had lain down the previous evening. She rose in dismay. She had slept so soundly that she had missed the ball. She rang her bell and unlocked the door. "What, miss, up already?" asked the maid, coming in with a tray on which were tea and bread and butter. "Yes, Martha. Oh, what will my aunt say? I have slept so long like a log, and never went to the ball. Why did you not call me?" "Please, miss, have you forgotten? You went to the ball last night." "No, I did not. I overslept myself." The maid smiled. "If I may be so bold as to say so, I think, Miss Betty, you are dreaming still." "No, I did not go." The maid took up the satin dress. It was crumpled, the lace was a little torn, and the train showed unmistakable signs of having been drawn over a floor. Then she held up the shoes. They had been worn, and well worn, as if danced in all night. "Look here, miss, here's your programme." "Why, dearie me, you must have had a lot of dancing. It's quite full." Betty looked at the programme with dazed eyes, then at the camellia. It had lost some of its petals, and these had not fallen on the toilet cover. Where were they? What was the meaning of this? "Martha, bring me my hot water, and leave me alone." Betty was sorely perplexed. There were evidences that her dress had been worn. The pearl necklace was in the case, but not as she had left it, outside. She bathed her head in cold water. She racked her brain. She could not recall the smallest particular of the ball. She perused the programme. A light colour came to her cheeks as she recognized the initials, C.F., those of Captain Charles Fontanel, of whom of late she had seen a good deal. Other characters expressed nothing to her mind. "How very strange," she said. "And I was lying on the bed in the dress I had on yesterday evening. I cannot explain it." 20 minutes later, Betty went downstairs and entered the breakfast room. Lady Lacy was there. She went up to her aunt and kissed her. "I'm so sorry that I overslept myself," she said. "I was like one of the 7 sleepers." "My dear, I should not have minded you if you had not come down till midday. After a first ball you must be tired." "I meant last night." "How last night?" "I mean when I went to dress." "Oh, you were punctual enough. When I was ready you were already in the hall." The bewilderment of the girl grew apace. "I am sure," said her aunt, "you enjoyed yourself. But you gave the lion's share of the dances to Captain Fontanel. If this had been at Exeter, it would have caused talk. But here you are, known only to a few. However, Lady Belgrove observed it." "I hope you are not very tired, auntie darling," said Betty, to change slightly the theme that perplexed her. "Nothing to speak of. I like to go to the ball. It recalls my old dancing days. But I thought you looked white and fagged all evening. Perhaps it was the excitement." As soon as breakfast was concluded, Betty escaped to her room. A fear was oppressing her. The only explanation of the mystery was that she had been to the dance in her sleep. She was a somnambulist. What had she said and done when unconscious? What a dreadful thing it would have been had she woke up in the middle of a dance! She must have dressed herself, gone to Lady Belgrove's, danced all night, returned, taken off her dress, put on her afternoon tea gown, lain down and concluded her sleep, all in one long tract of unconsciousness. "By the way," her aunt said the next day, "I have tickets for Carmen, at Her Majesty's. You would like to go?" "Oh, delighted, aunt. I know some of the music, of course, the Toreador song, but I have never heard the whole opera. It will be delightful." "And you're not too tired to go?" "No, 10,000 times no. I shall love to see it." "What dress will you go in?" "I think my black, and I'll put a rose in my hair." "That will do very well. The black becomes you. I think you could not do better." Betty was highly delighted. She had been to plays, never to a real opera. In the evening dinner was early, unnecessarily early, and Betty knew that it would not take her long to dress, so she went into the little conservatory and seated herself there. The scent of heliotropes was strong. Betty called them cherry pie. She had got the libretto, and she looked it over, but as she looked, her eyes closed, and without being aware that she was going to sleep, in a moment she was completely unconscious. She woke feeling stiff and cold. "Goodness," she said, "I hope I'm not late. Why, what is that light?" A glimmer of dawn shone in at the conservatory windows. Much astonished, she left it. The hall, the staircase were dark. She groped her way to her room and switched on the electric light. Before her lay her black and white muslin dress on the bed. On the table were her white 12-button gloves folded about her fan. She took them up, and below them, somewhat crumpled, lay a playbill, scented. "How very unaccountable this is," she said, and removing the dress, seated herself on the bed and thought. "Why did they turn out the lights?" she asked herself, then sprang to her feet, switched off the electric current, and saw that actually the morning light was entering the room. She resumed her seat, and put her hands to her brow. It cannot be that this dreadful thing has happened again." Presently she heard the servant stirring. She hastily undressed and retired between the sheets, but not to sleep. Her mind worked. She was seriously alarmed. At the usual time Martha arrived with tea. "Awake, Miss Betty," she said. "I hope you had a nice evening. I dare say it was beautiful." "But," began the girl, and then checked herself and said, "Is my aunt getting up? Is she very tired?" "Oh, miss, my lady is a wonderful person. She never seems to tire. She is always down at the same time." Betty dressed, but her mind was in turmoil. One thing she was resolved. She must see a doctor, but she would not frighten her aunt. She would keep the matter close from her. When she came into the breakfast room, Lady Lacy said, "I thought Mace's voice was superb, but I did not much care for the Carmen. What did you think, dear?" "Aunt," said Betty, anxious to change the topic, "would you mind my seeing a doctor? I don't think I'm quite well." "Not well? Why, what's the matter with you?" "I have such dead fits of drowsiness." "My dearest, is that to be wondered at, with this racketing about, balls and theatres, every other than the quiet life at home? But I will admit that you struck me as looking very pale last night. You shall certainly see Dr. Groves." When the medical man arrived, Betty intimated that she wished to speak with him alone, and he was shown with her into the morning room. "Oh, Dr. Groves," she said nervously, "it is such a strange thing I have to say. I believe I walk in my sleep. You have eaten something that disagreed with you. But it lasted so long. How do you mean? Have you long been subject to it? Dear no, I never had any signs of it before I came to London this season. And how were you roused? How did you become aware of it? I was not aroused at all. The fact is, I went to sleep to Lady Belgrove's ball, and danced there and came back, and woke up in the morning without knowing I had been. What? And then, last night, I went to sleep to Her Majesty's and heard Carmen, but I woke up in the conservatory here at early dawn, and I remember nothing about it. This is a very extraordinary story. Are you sure you went to the ball and to the opera? Quite sure. My dress had been used on both occasions, and my shoes and fan and gloves as well. Did you go with Lady Lacy? Oh yes, I was with her all the time, but I remember nothing about it. I must speak to her ladyship. Please, please do not. It would frighten her, and I do not wish her to suspect anything except that I am a little out of sorts. She gets nervous about me. Dr. Groves mused for a while, and then he said, I cannot see that this is at all a case of somnambulism. What is it then? Lapse of memory. Have you suffered from that previously? Nothing to speak of. Of course I do not always remember everything. I do not always recollect commissions given to me unless I write them down, and I cannot say that I remember all of the novels I have read, or what was the menu at dinner yesterday. That's quite a different matter. What I refer to is spaces of blank in your memory. How often has this occurred? Twice. And quite recently? Yes, I never knew anything of the kind before. I think that the sooner you return to the country, the better. It is possible that the strain of coming out and the change of entering into gay life in town has been too much for you. Take care and economize your pleasures. Do not attempt too much, and if anything of the sort happens again, send for me. Then you won't mention this to my aunt? No, not at this time. I will say that you have been a little overwrought and must be spared too much excitement. Thank you so much, Dr. Groves. Now it was that a new mystery came to confound Betty. She rang her bell. Martha, she said, when her maid appeared, where's that novel I had yesterday from the circulating library? I put it on the boudoir table. I have not noticed it, miss. Please look for it. I have hunted everywhere for it, and it cannot be found. I will look in the parlour, miss, and in the schoolroom. I have not been in the schoolroom at all, and I know that it is not in the drawing-room. A search was instituted, but the book could not be found. On the morrow it was in the boudoir, where Betty had placed it on her return from Moody's. One of the maids took it, was her explanation, but she did not much care for the book. Perhaps it was due to her preoccupation, and not to any lack of stirring incident in the story. She sent it back and took out another. Next morning that also disappeared. Now it became customary, as surely as she drew a novel from the library, that it vanished clean away. Betty was greatly amazed. She could not read a novel she brought home till a day or two later. She took to putting the book, as soon as it was in the house, into one of her drawers, or into a cupboard, but the result was the same. Finally, she had locked the newly acquired volume in her desk, and it had disappeared thence also. Her patience gave way. There must be one of the domestics with a ravenous appetite for fiction which drove her to carry off a book of the sort whenever it came into the house, and even to tamper with a lock to obtain it. Betty had been most reluctant to speak of the matter to her aunt, but now she made to her a formal complaint. The servants were all questioned and strongly protested their innocence. Not one of them had ventured to do such a thing as that with which they were charged. However, from this time forward the annoyance ceased, and Betty and Lady Lacy naturally concluded that this was the result of the stir that had been made. "Betty," said Lady Lacy, "what do you say to going to the new play at the Gaiety? I hear it very highly spoken of. Mrs. Fontanelle has a box and has asked if we will join her." "I should love it," replied the girl. "We have been rather quiet of late." But her heart was oppressed with fear. She said to her maid, "Martha, will you dress me this evening, and pray stay with me till my aunt is ready and calls for me?" "Yes, miss, I shall be pleased to do so." But the girl looked somewhat surprised at the latter part of the request. Betty thought well to explain. "I don't know what it is, but I feel somewhat out of spirits and nervous, and I am afraid of being left alone, lest something should happen." "Happen, miss? If you're not feeling well, would it not be as well to stay at home?" "Oh, not for the world. I must go. I shall be all right so soon as I am in the carriage. It will pass off then. Shall I get you a glass of sherry, or anything?" No, it's not that. You remain with me, and I shall be myself again." That evening Betty went to the theatre. There was no reoccurrence of the sleeping fit, with its concomitants. Captain Fontanel was in the box, and made himself vastly agreeable. He had a seat by Betty, and talked to her not only between the acts, but also a good deal whilst the actors were on stage. With this she could have dispensed. She was not such an habitué of the theatre as not to be intensely interested with what was enacted before her. Between two of the acts he said to her, "My mother is engaging Lady Lacy. She has a scheme in her head, but wants her consent to carry it out, to make it quite too charming, and I am deputed to get you to acquiesce." "What is it?" "We propose having a boat and going to the Henley Regatta. Will you come?" "I should enjoy it above everything. I have never seen a regatta, that is to say, not one so famous, and not of this kind. There were regattas at Ilfracombe, but they were different." "Very well, then. The party shall consist of only my mother and sister and your two selves, and young Fulwell, who is dancing attendance on Jeanette, and Putsey, who is a tame cat. I am sure my mother will persuade your aunt. What a lively old lady she is, and for her years how she does enjoy life." "It will be a most happy conclusion to our stay in town," said Betty. "We are going back to Auntie's little cottage in Devon in a few days. She wants to be at home for Good Friday and Easter Day." End of section 2. Recording by Kirk Ziegler, Ogden, Utah. Voiceover-solutions.com